Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide valuation and divorce mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. During this episode, we will discuss the divorce mediation process and the Better Apart method with Gabrielle Hartley. She is a leading divorce attorney, online mediator, and author of Better Apart. She's also a vice chair in the American Bar Association's dispute resolution section. And when she wrote Better Apart, Gwyneth Paltrow actually endorsed her book. That is so interesting. Welcome, Gabrielle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. So you have such an interesting and diverse background and experience in family law. Why don't we start there so that people can get, like, you're everywhere speaking, being in radio, all of this. Like, tell us more.
So when I grew up, when I was 9, it all starts at the beginning, right? When my brother was 6, my parents divorced. And we were lucky enough that they did it really well with dignity, the way that now I feel like the younger generation is starting to do, or even our generation is starting, not that we're not younger, but that they're starting to do more and more. But when I grew up, it was like considered almost weird. Yeah. And I thought there had been a lot of progress, but when I went and clerked for Judge Jeffrey Sunshine in New York City, I saw that things were still pretty backward. Lawyers and the system, while they're obviously necessary and the system is there for a reason, they can make a little problem sort of blow up into a big problem. And then they're causing a lot of collateral damage. And over time, then when I went in private practice, I just felt like almost like a missionary, like a positive divorce missionary. In addition to my online mediation practice, I stopped practicing in court. And now I exclusively talk about how you can make your process better and how to do so without glossing over the important facets, such as the valuation of a business or the values of bank accounts and all the important conversations. I always say hard now, easy later.
No, I totally, I saw that. And, part of it I wanted to kind of understand, because I enjoy litigation. I enjoy kind of going in and trying to get people to understand the value that maybe are totally disagreeing. I also think having a background in litigation gives you a perspective of how divorces happen in that space. But what was there something else besides your, childhood kind of issue with seeing divorce? What else motivated you to transition from just being a divorce lawyer to maybe being a family mediator?
So the thing is, right from go, I could really see what the issues were in court. And that's not where I wanted to put my energy. Although I love advocating, like you love litigation, I absolutely love advocating. It's a lot of fun, but you have to remember that when you are skewering your ex, number one, you need to consider the impact that it's going to have on your kids. But even if you don't have kids, if you are taking the scorched earth approach, which again, sometimes it's necessary. I don't mean to suggest that it's never necessary, but when you take that approach, that's going to sit in your head, in your mind, in your body. It's going to become part of you. And you're going to have that narrative. And maybe that's okay for you. Everyone has a different philosophy of life. Some people believe that it's all about the money. Some people believe that it's all about the narrative. I believe that they are sort of intertwined with each other, and you can't really unbundle them without paying attention to both. And as I got deeper into the writing process of Better Apart, I just felt more and more emboldened to move forward with the approach to divorce that was always more resonant for me.
Well, and I think that, as you bring up the Better Apart method and Better Apart, which is a book, which I really felt the book was, when I was looking at, there you go. When I was looking at it, I felt like it was a great starting point for people that were considering divorce. Like, what does this mean to us? Because everybody focuses on the court, like, oh, I'm going to divorce court. We got to split everything. But there's so much emotional that happens. And your book was endorsed by Gwyneth Paltrow, which that's when we started talking about this like kind of conscious uncoupling. So what is conscious uncoupling and how does it kind of lead into mediation, if you will?
So, conscious or mindful, right? Uncoupling or splitting is all about paying attention to how you feel in the moment and how you want to feel in future moments. How do you want to feel in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Before the book and the program launches into, what the better part method is, which I'll tell you briefly about, I talk about taking a pause. Like maybe you don't need a divorce, right? Which is a funny kind of thing to have in a divorce book, but it just invites the reader to take a step back and consider, is there a way we can communicate better? Is there a way that we can actually meaningfully shift our story from within the context of the relationship?
I like that. I like shifting the story because I think that everybody views divorce as horrible, as awful. It's like the worst thing that ever happened to me. But I also believe in choice. And I believe that we make choices maybe earlier in our life that we don't always think are great choices later in our life. People change, things change, and you should be able to have that opportunity. But I think an interesting thing from the book that that you brought up that I am totally stealing in Mediations is that you don't have to respect me, but you have to be respectful of me. And that was by your father. Your father said that. And it was a beautiful quote. And I think that gets to the key to it because people are always like, you don't respect me. You don't treat me a certain way. And I think respect is earned, but being respectful is like a central part of the mediation process. Talk more about it.
So the better part method, it has these 5 key elements, which are patience, respect, peace, clarity, and forgiveness. But they're all about you. They're all about how do you want to hold yourself through the process and beyond. So the respect piece is really about how are you going to have the most self-respect? Who are you? There's a story that I love that a rabbi said to me at a time when my father was in the hospital a few years ago. This was apropos of nothing. He was chatting and he said, there was a man who had a mother who had Alzheimer's, and he would go and visit his mother every day. And the people at the reception said, "Why do you visit? She doesn't even know who you are." And the man said, "But I know who I am." And that resonated so strongly for me. And I believe that translates into all of us, when we're faced with conflict that feels insurmountable, or people that feel unreasonable, or situations that feel unfathomable, all we can do is force ourselves, and it's hard, to take that step back, to find that self-respect. And that's where the patience come in, right? Like finding patience for yourself, finding patience for your spouse or your ex, finding patience for the business evaluator who didn't really understand the way the business runs and why you screw it all up. You know what I mean?
It's too low, it's too high. Yeah,
right,
totally.
Exactly. And then as the business evaluator, thinking, looking, reflecting, not being attached, and then explaining rather than defending, right? So it's all a process. I don't know if I answered your question.
No. I think it's an area. A lot of people don't like divorce. A lot of people in the valuation community, a lot of people in the accounting community, in the legal community, because it's too, that's too sticky, or it's too messy, or it's too emotional. Or do people cry when they meet with you? And I was like, yeah, but you have to understand, like, let's go back a little bit. When people are getting divorced, there's something happening. And usually we project and say, well, they cheated on me. Well, they did this and and they're a narcissist, right? But we have to go and we have to reverse it and say, okay, but where did I go wrong And how can I be, maybe I'm not the person that I wanted to be, like, and how can I be it? And so to me, your book spoke to me a little bit in that it's combining, yes, this is a process, but how do you go through the emotional process and get to a better space? And so you actually kind of combined yoga, meditation, mediation, and all of these together. And so, from that perspective, I think that it gets people, when we go through something for the first time, we want to know what we're going to experience. And in some capacity, I think that that book helps people understand what they're going to experience so that when they get there, it's not like, oh, I didn't realize when we got to the end, I was going to maybe have an emotional breakdown, because that's when we're fine. Like the finalization of a divorce is a huge emotional process. But you also created the book to help train other people on online mediation and other professionals. So maybe you can tell people what to expect in the book for that.
Well, so the book is actually part of the curriculum for anyone who's doing the training, right? The book itself is written for the end user. And the training is for the professionals to understand how to close a case more efficiently, so that the people have bought in, how to notice your own biases when you're listening, how to not project. I mean, that's all part of the course. That's not in the book. What the book tells you is, how do I pick the right lawyer? What are the different ways I can proceed? What is collaborative law? What is mediation? What is litigation? Which do I need? What questions do I ask a lawyer? Okay, so there are these 5 elemental things: the patience, peace, respect, clarity, and forgiveness. But what does that have to do with my spreadsheet? Well, a lot, right? So I don't know if that's the chapter you looked at. It was the finance chapter, what to let go of, what to hold on to. And so it's really a whole different way. It's really a shift of the paradigm. I like to call it the positive divorce movement, because it's almost oxymoronic. The word positive and divorce are usually not linked with each other. But when you think about it, what's sad is staying in an unhappy marriage.
Right.
And what's also sad is getting divorced and then feeling like crap about it for the rest of your life, because you're so flooded with shame and all of those negative narratives. But now there's so many resources to help shift it. Not to say that it's not sad. Of course it's sad. And the book also explores the grief process. And in the back of the book, I have a whole section of additional resources, books, and programs that you might want to look into to further explore how you can start to feel better.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I had a friend that got divorced in the past couple of years. And one of the issues, and everybody hired attorneys and valuation experts and all of this, and everybody was fighting, lots of money spent, and we were still millions of dollars apart, right? and this friend came to me and she's like, you need to help me get through this, because we're millions of dollars apart. We have all these experts, all these attorneys, you know this space. But we have 3 children, and I want to co-parent, and I want to have them have a great life, because we don't really hate each other. We just can't be together. And we came in and did a mediation, and were able to kind of bridge that gap of value, and in some respect started to resurrect the relationship and the communications. But I think you brought up a couple good things in the book. Is how can we describe to people what is mediation, and how is it even different than going to divorce court? Because if this is your first time getting divorced, you don't know. I don't know what the options are. I see TV and it says you go and fight in court. So how do we explain to them some of the differences?
So that's a really great question. And I take that probably for granted, having been a divorce attorney and mediator for 25 years. Mediation means you're going to a third party neutral who's not going to take sides. So for instance, if you were to hire someone locally or if you were to hire me online, the mediator is a neutral. We sit with you and we hear both perspectives. We gather the facts, and then the mediator helps you arrive at a resolution that works for your family. Now, mediation can be very passive. It can be very directive. You're in charge of that. But you do need to pick a mediator who's a good fit for you, because just like anything else, a mediator is not one size fits all, right? Now, if you're in mediation, I highly recommend you still get a legal consultation or 2 or 3 to know what your rights are, because nothing ruins a negotiation more than not getting advice and then at the end coming back and unraveling all of the work you did with your mediator. So really, like, an educated consumer is really the best customer. I think that's, an ad for NBO or some kind of men's clothing shop. But it's really true that if you don't know what you're entitled to, then you can't understand what you're giving up, and vice versa. If you don't know what you're looking at having to pay, you don't know if you're being generous or not being generous, regardless of how it may feel.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No. Keep on going. Sorry.
Litigation is the conventional Kramer versus Kramer kind of way forward. If anybody remembers that movie or has heard of it, it's like a cult movie from the 70s or late 70s. It is where you have an advocate, your spouse has an advocate, and they're literally adversarial bulldogs fighting. So that doesn't seem like it makes much sense for restructuring a family. If you have an impossible spouse who won't disclose, or is doing something untoward, absolutely litigation is necessary. I am not a mediator who is anti-litigation. I just don't think it's needed that often. Sometimes you may need litigation just to start the process, to show the other side that you mean business. It like lights a fire. And then you can come to mediation once one thing is filed and everyone gets their bills for $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. Like, oh, I don't need to do that. And then they come into mediation. But again, you need to know your rights. Litigation involves going to court for motions. Everything you want is typically arrived at in front of the judge. Your lawyers these days resolve a lot of things in the courthouse walls, but it's halls, not in the walls, in the halls. Help, let me out. But it's not a very dignified way forward if you can help it. You may do something called collaborative law, and there's collaborative law with a large C and with a small c. So collaborative law with a small c is what I really enjoy doing a lot, which is, in Massachusetts, I still do practice law, I still do family law, but people know when they hire me, I tell them, I'm not going to court, okay? So here's the deal, and I explain how the transition to a litigator will go, and that's all built into the arrangement. But they know that if anyone can resolve it at the table, I can, but I'm not a magician and I can't solve all problems all the time. So with a small c, the other lawyer knows, hey, once you file, I'm out of the case, and you're going to have to deal with like a litigator who you're not going to like, because I'm going to refer them to someone who's extraordinarily aggressive, right? So, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. That's sort of how I play it, right? And so with the small c, we sit down at tables and we have an agenda and we talk it out issue by issue. And you need to have someone who's skillful about, knowing where to push and where to let go. Oftentimes, when you're negotiating, those low dangling fruits that people can agree to, when you start making agreements, that's going to start the harder things to fall into place. It's just like human dynamics. Now, I'm on a real roll here. Sorry if I'm going too long.
It's great.
Collaborate with a large C is what people refer to as collaborative law. And Melissa, I believe you do collaborative practice valuations. Collaborative law is a program that was created and brought forward by Pauline Tesler and someone else whose name is escaping me, so I apologize if they're listening to you. You're agreeing not to go to court. You legitimately cannot go to court with the lawyers that you have, and those lawyers don't typically have a transition plan, whereas I would have a transition plan for the litigation. The rules of evidence don't apply, but it's sort of like a kinder, gentler way to move through your divorce with standardized meetings and to get agreements moving without wasting thousands and thousands of dollars in court. And when you go the mediation route or the collaborative route, you are more likely to come to agreements such as hiring a valuation expert or a financial expert jointly. While you can still do that at litigation, when you do it at the table, it's just more likely to stick and to help move things forward.
Yeah, and I think that all of the ways to get divorced is just, you can kind of start with, can you just get divorced and talk to your husband or your wife? No. Okay, well, do you need to add somebody in? Okay, well, let's add a mediator. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, do you need some advice? Well, you can have attorneys on the side. But one of the things that people, and then collaborative, you're going to add maybe a financial neutral or a therapist or a coach. A lot of people call them different things. But when you're looking at all of these options, I think that part of it is about control. And so it's taking back some of that control, because a lot of times when you're going to litigation and they say, well, what's the judge going to do? Or how are they going to figure it out? And I was like, so there's a part of litigation that we can't predict. And that is what the judge is going to do. It depends on the judge. It depends on the state. It depends on the court. It depends on your issues. It depends on how that judge woke up in the morning. I mean, let's be real, so they're people too. So I can't predict what they're going to look at, but in mediation or in collaborative, you have a little bit more control. It's not that one of you get to say how it happens, but you can certainly say, like, I feel like I want the house, or I feel like I need the house, kind of thing. And mediation, we talk a lot about wants and needs and positions, and, that maybe you think you need this house that the family has grown up in, or maybe you just need a safe environment, and so let's talk through some of the mediation and how because we're not coming in and saying, okay, you get the house, you get the dog, you take the kids on Sunday, you get the kids, like, we're not doing that. We're kind of, in my mind, like Uber brainstorming. That's what I kind of call it. Like, we're coming in and saying, hey guys, we've seen hundreds and thousands of divorces. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about nesting? Have you thought about keeping one main house but moving back? And they're like, whoa, I don't know about that. So mediation is really us trying to help them understand that there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But what do you think, some advice, or, what are some of the benefits to actually mediating a divorce, as opposed to, I actually see more people falling into mediation than collaborative or litigation right now. And I don't know why that is. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I also think it's becoming much more mainstream. The American Bar Association dispute resolution mediation section has grown tremendously in the last year or so. I think people are understanding the value, and that it's not some woo-woo thing. And it doesn't mean you can't have a lawyer. I think that's like, I mediate all over the country. I don't know the law all over the country. So, right. I mean, I always tell people, go find out what your rights are. Then let's get started. I have one meeting before they meet with the lawyers, and I tell them what they need to learn from the lawyers. So they're not like, oh, I don't know what to ask, right? So first off, I want to say the judge I used to work for, who's now literally the chief of all the matrimonial cases in New York State, he used to always say, you don't want this stranger in black robes deciding your life. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. You lose all control, and the things that you think are important to you may not be legally relevant. The judge may disagree with you. You may remind him of some girlfriend who dumped him when he was 16, or some boyfriend who jilted, her, or whatever the case may be. Don't assume that the other person, the judge, is going to be on your side. You have no idea. And looking at this as a win-lose proposition isn't going to do anything for you or for your family. It's just not. So mediation is just a really reasonable, sensible way to proceed. It's not creating the drama that litigation creates. This is the thing, like, people come to me and tell me their story. And as they're talking, the way my mind works, having been in court for, 2 decades and then some, I start thinking like, oh, there's something I could fight about. There's something they could fight about. There's something they could fight about. There's, the little tree is starting to like populate with all the branches of all the arguments, all the rabbit holes, each worth $3,000 to $10,000, right? So you're making so much money as the lawyer, and you're thinking, well, you're justifying it. Like, I'm getting the client what they deserve. And like, it's really a philosophical decision that you have to make for yourself. I am of counsel to a very strong litigator in Manhattan, who I refer all my cases that cannot be mediated to. And, we discussed this at length, like, we have a very philosophically different approach to divorce law, yet we believe in one another because we know that people are not all the same. None of this is one size fits all. The only thing that is one size fits all is you all need to have businesses evaluated. Whether you're mediating, like, the best mediation is one, where there are some assets, where it's integrated. I'm a big believer in being, in not being penny wise and pound foolish. Get a real strong understanding of what you are giving, what you're getting, what your exposure is. That's the only way you're going to feel good and like wholehearted when you look at yourself in the mirror and you look at your ex, if you have that kind of relationship. And it doesn't matter if you've been married for 1 year or 30 years. It really doesn't. Like, we all know people, if not ourselves, who are still holding on to some breakup from 100 years ago, and you can't even believe, like, how are you still holding on to it? It's because it wasn't processed, which is another thing. There's a lot of conversation about how much processing is necessary at the negotiation table, right? Like, how much do we let that happen? And that's a whole other podcast, but it's a very interesting topic, because if you don't validate and hear what the other person has to say, you're not going to move your case along. So that goes to the practitioners, right? Validate, validate, validate. Doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. If you're the person who cheated and your wife or your husband is so mad at you, it could go a really long way for you to say, I hear you saying that you're really angry that I cheated and you need an apology. And I am really sorry. And even if you're not sorry about the cheating, I bet you're sorry about something about it, how it happened, that you got caught. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's always a way to be honest and validate at the same time. Never be dishonest. Never, never, never. But think before you talk.
Right. Well, and if you go into the dynamic of maybe one business owner, and it could be male or female, because I see both sides, but you have the business owner that maybe controlled all the finances, and then then they cheat. Okay. And then you have the other spouse that's like, I'm so mad. Like, you have all the control of the finances. So the only way I can get back at you is I'm going to go to court and I'm going to say, you cheated, so give me more. And in the state of Missouri, I unfortunately have to say, so that doesn't matter. And they're like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? Like, that's the whole reason why this all ended. Like, he needs to pay or she needs to pay because they cheated. And it's a real emotional breakdown. And it's really difficult because they thought that they could trade the hurt for financial gain.
Right.
And it doesn't work like that. And so now they're left with the hurt and maybe just the financial situation, splitting in half or doing whatever, but they wanted blood,
And sometimes,
yeah.
Sometimes, like, I've had cases where the person with the money was the cheated on person, and they learn that they still have to pay half of what they have in New York and in Massachusetts. It's not necessarily half, but it's equitable, which is typically half. And they have to pay, and they might have to pay child support, and they might have to pay maintenance or alimony. And it's not relevant, although this is a time where litigators may disagree. They may say, well, the judges are people too. And if you have an egregious enough story, it may go. But if it's going to go in the balance, it's going to go in the balance like you're fighting over two houses of equal value. And if you're the one who's really wronged, you might get the house that you both want. You know what I mean? But like,
Right.
you're not going to get more money. You might get
Right.
like some things thrown at you to sort of, solve it. But here's a little reality check, which is even if you get all the money, it might make you feel a little better. It's not going to make all the pain go away. It's just not.
No. But in mediation or collaborative, if there is a situation that would warrant, and really it's just if you guys can agree to it, there could be an unequal split of the assets. But what I have told people before is that if it's unconscionable, if it's just ridiculous, the court may not do it. But I want to talk just a little bit about that, because people come in and they say, okay, I decided I'm going to work with Gabrielle and she's my mediator. And so when are we going to be divorced? Talk to them about, because I think that that's kind of a misunderstood piece, that at some point you will have to, because there are mediators that are lawyers, there are mediators that are therapists, financial people, you can do a lot. Mediation is sort of the Wild West in some respect. But you still have to have somebody file for divorce, and you have to still legally go through that process. So, and typically the mediator is not the one doing that, like, ever, right?
I can't hear you, Melissa.
Oh, sorry.
Typically what?
So typically the mediator is not going to file for divorce.
That's
You're
correct.
still going to, so people come into mediation saying, well, I want to do mediation because I don't want to deal with lawyers. I don't want to pay any lawyers. And I'm like, yeah, so you're still going to have to get a lawyer involved.
Right. So there are some DIY platforms in certain states. Erin Levine has Hello Divorce. Laura Wasser has It's Over Easy. There's something called the Quick Divorce. They're not all over the country, but there are places. Some states have easy to file papers, but if you've got kids and you've got stuff, you're going to need to have a separation agreement. You just are, because you're going to need something that's going to designate who gets what, how the kids are going to be managed between your households. And, like I said in the very beginning, hard now, easy later. The more certainty and predictability that your agreement has, the fewer conflicts you're going to have as you move along. So if someone hires me from Massachusetts or from New York, I will do the entire separation agreement because I'm a lawyer here and there, and I know how to do it. And there's presently no conflict for me to do it. It just says I'm a lawyer. They were advised to get, they're advised to get separate lawyers. I'm serving as their neutral. But I still don't do all the paperwork. I always send people out, unless it's very simple, to do the paperwork. When I have clients who are in different parts of the country, I do my best to help them find mediation-friendly attorneys. But typically, most of the expense of the process is in coming up with the terms of the separation agreement, right? And so what we do is what's going to avoid all the court. And then it's just the administrative fees for the filing. And I imagine there's a really big range in those fees. But think about how much more they would be if you were having conversations at $400 or $600 an hour, each of you separately, and then the lawyers are coming together. So like you might be able to do it with me in 10 hours or 4 hours or, something like that. And you have to consider when you're doing it with the lawyers, you're both having your venting sessions, the lawyers are coming together, you're going separate again. You're probably looking at more like 30 or 50 hours. So just do that math and you're going to realize how much more efficient it is to go to a mediator. Now, how long it will take really depends on who you hire and where you live. In Manhattan, there's a bigger backlog than in Massachusetts. From what I understand, Connecticut has even a longer backlog right now because of COVID. So you need to find out locally what the runway is. And if you have a very simple divorce, you might be able to go to some local mediator who can just do it for you very quickly, and they have relationships with local lawyers. If you have a more complicated divorce, you're going to want to hire someone like me or somebody else, Susan Guthrie, someone who does a lot of high-end divorces, who has more experience in that regard. And I would say it's kind of like going to the dentist. You went in with your teeth and then you got a crown and it's a couple of $1,000s later and you're like, gosh, darn it, that was so expensive. And I feel exactly the same. So it might cost more, but you're going to feel better when it's all over. And especially if you do it well. I think this is like, I don't want to compare your divorce to a spa day, but but I do think that you can have a divorce that's actually, the whole process can be pleasant.
Yeah.
Even if it's sad, it can be, it can feel like a relief. I've had lots of divorces where people have been very grateful and very expressive of their gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different psychology in the high net worth divorce area. I think that in general, it's trying to understand, but the ways mediation isn't just one mediator, like co-mediation, which
Absolutely.
I do a lot. And that's how you work with people like me, is also a piece. And so it's, maybe we can talk a little bit about how do you develop a team that kind of supports that whole process, but you're still in control of it. You're kind of getting the smartest people in the room, but what is co-mediation then?
I love co-mediation. It is so much fun. I love the real collaborative process too, which is team-based. Although co-mediation, at least where I live, is much more popular. Many more people do it, and in New York as well. So co-mediation, just as you just said, it would involve a mediator, maybe two mediators, depending on the size of the net worth and how much you need to process what makes sense for both of you. And then you can have a financial expert, you can have a mental health expert, you can have a valuation expert, you can have a child therapist expert, you can have a divorce coach, you could have, two child advocates, one who's a specialist in, ADHD or something that your kid has, and someone else who just does parenting plans. I mean, I would say most teams that I have worked on have probably 4 people, not more than that, but depending on the complexity of the case, things can be complicated when there's a lot of money, when there are children with special needs, right? Or where there are adults with special needs.
Yeah.
And special needs don't necessarily mean in a wheelchair, like complicated people who still want to do things nicely. There's lots. If you're thinking like, oh, that sounds like me, or that's my husband or my wife, like it's a lot of people. So, the problem, and one of the reasons that I'm very committed to doing a lot of talking, not just to professionals, but to people, is that I think that the shame and stigma of divorce persists, and it's time to wrap it up. Laura Wasser calls it the evolution of dissolution. I call it the positive divorce movement. I mean, the fact is that when you consider that 50% of all marriages do still end in divorce, that means all of those people's kids are going to feel like crappy about themselves if you don't feel good about yourself and your choice. And even if it weren't your choice, how can you shift your narrative so that you believe that in fact it was your choice, even if you weren't the active decision maker, and that it was a good choice? You wouldn't put up with something anymore. That's your choice, right?
Well, and I think that the choice is the key. And that we're all grown adults and we can change our mind, and that's okay. There's so much, well, this is the bad way or this is the good way. And I was like, can't it just be the way? Can't it just be my way, of how I feel like I'm going to live my life and things like that. But I think another piece of that is trying to understand how mediation fits in here. So somebody says, you know what, and maybe they're listening, or maybe they've been reading about, I'm going to get divorced, but they haven't said anything to their spouse. What do you say to somebody who comes to you and says, I like this process. I think this would be healthy for us. We got some issues, but I think we could work through them, but I don't think I can convince my husband or wife to do this. Like what? Because I think that's where it comes sometimes. Is like you got one person that wants to do it, the other person's like, I don't know.
You need a 2-party buy-in. So you might have to spend $10,000 or $30,000 first when the other person gets sick of it. The other person, I mean, a lot of cases come to me after something's been filed, after there's been some big upheaval, after the judge orders them out of mediation. And that's because one of the people just did not believe in mediation, did not want to go to mediation. It could be either person. I mean, again, that's a whole other show we could do, like, what the different profiles of people who wind up in mediation and how they get there. But basically, just because you may have been served with papers, it doesn't mean that it's a fait accompli, that you're going all the way to trial. Most cases resolve long before trial. A mediator can be used at any point along the litigation. You don't need your lawyer's assent to go to a mediation, although you should certainly talk to them about it. But remember, you have to be mindful of your own interests. So that's another reason that I wrote Better Apart. And I need to mention Elena Brower is my yoga expert in the book. While I practice yoga, I'm not a yogi or yogini. Yeah. So, I just feel like it's super, oh, you froze again. Sorry. I just think it's really important that you remember that this is your life. It's not your lawyer's life. It's not your best friend's life. It's not your mother's life or your sister's life. You have to make smart choices for you, and only you know what those are. So if you find yourself dragged into court, it's okay. And if you find that you have to stay in court the whole way, that's okay too. And I talk about that in the book too. I mean, this book was very well thought through and written over a period of years, carefully addressing a lot of issues that are going to be relevant for most people who, I think all people who are getting divorced, have been divorced. Even I've gotten notes from people who are 30 years, 40 years post-divorce saying, oh my gosh, I wish I had read this. I could have lived my whole life differently. That's like a little, that's a very big compliment, but it's sad also.
Yeah, no. And I think that we also have to understand in the divorce area that there can be a combination of all of these things. It doesn't have to be like what you just said. It doesn't have to be litigation or mediation or collaborative. It can be because we come in and we will be the one expert for either in litigation, in mediation, in collaborative, and we're coming in and trying to make it so that they don't have to hire two experts.
Exactly.
Right? So we're trying to make it somewhat efficient, but also what I've told people is the litigation process to get documents for a business or financial things requires you subpoena to the bank, to the institutions. That costs money, that costs time, it costs effort. And usually that's a product of mistrust in the couple in general in divorce. And they're like, well, I don't know if he's being truthful about anything. But I say in mediation, I can just request the documents. Like, let's just look at it at least, because you could spend months trying to just get documents to then get them and say, oh, the business is worth nothing.
But also, even in litigation, sometimes I have had situations where the client says, I know what they have, and the lawyer feels that they're not covering their butt if they don't subpoena everything and get everything. So it can get really complicated. And sometimes if there's a lot of money, you do want to make sure you have all your information. And also, if there's not a lot of money, you want to make sure you have all your information. So I guess we could summarize by saying, no matter what, you need to know what you have and what you're entitled to and what you're okay walking away from. Right?
No, I think that's interesting. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about just as we go forth is, what are some of your best tips for women who may be considering divorce but may not have access to the finances? Maybe they don't have access to the bank accounts. They don't know how they could possibly pay for a divorce. They are afraid to tell their narcissistic husband that they want to get divorced because they're afraid they're going to have no money to support themselves and things like that. And I think that's a real concern. I say for women, it can be men, it can be women, it can be anybody that doesn't have access. Sometimes we call them the outspouse. They don't have control over anything. They don't even know where the bank accounts are. I mean, I had one client call this week that was like, I know he has 3 businesses. I don't know where they are. I don't know what the names are. And I was like, because there's a lot of people that keep their spouse kind of out of the loop in the financial situation. So what would you say to somebody like that?
Yeah, so that obviously happens a lot. And when that happens, the first thing I'd say is, borrow however many $100 you need from a friend or a relative. Don't put it on your credit card where your spouse is going to see it and become angry that they see it. And go have a consultation with a very well-respected lawyer and find out what your rights are. Find out if the lawyer will go immediately to court if you give them a retainer of maybe, $4,000 or $5,000 to get it going, so that they can go and make a motion so that legal fees can be paid for by your spouse. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing is there are certain companies, if you don't prevail in that, there are companies, if anybody's interested, you can contact me and I'll get you the name. There is a professional, her name is Nicole Noonan. Mm-hmm. She has a company. I really like her. You've met her also, I could see. She has a program where you're basically paying with a lien on a property that you have, but
it's kind of like financing a divorce.
The terms are pretty favorable. Yeah, I was hesitating because I was trying to think of them, but I don't remember. But yeah, you can finance your divorce. You can put divorce sometimes on a credit card. Oftentimes, especially when I was litigating, people would pay a certain amount and then maybe they'd have a relative pay a certain amount, and then I would take the balance on a credit card. Some lawyers will let you do finance plans. I know when I was a really young lawyer just starting out, I would do that for people all the time. So don't talk yourself out of your ability to move forward. Ask around, figure out maybe there's someone who's super smart and young and aggressive and really wants to help. There's a lot of people like that. Find someone in your area, pay for that first consultation. Once you're, maybe find 2 different people, find out how the best way is to finance your divorce, but don't assume you can't get a divorce.
Right.
That said, it may be true that if you get a divorce and you've been staying at home, you may need to get a job now. And if that happens, you're just going to have to deal with that reality. There are lots of times where that happens. And then after the fact, surprisingly, these people, the women typically come back and they tell me, it was really scary getting back out there, but they feel good because now they're financially independent.
Well, because we're in the middle of an economic crisis. Okay. Yeah. And so we even before then, though, the majority of us, if you're 2 wage earners or 1 wage earner, we're just barely making enough to pay our bills. And so to assume that you're going to kind of go from one household to 2 different households, and it's already going to be difficult, right? That's going to be a stretch. Everybody kind of has to downsize a little bit or start to say, okay, how can we be more fiscally responsible? But if there is some sort of assets, if there's some sort of retirement or, money somewhere, when you get divorced, you could then take some of that money and pay the people back, or you can get out. So it's really short term. But I think that money issue sometimes makes people stay in horrific marriages longer because they're just like, I'm just going to deal with it. I can't afford to get divorced, and it's hard. And those will eventually, there will be something that, the straw that breaks the camel's back, at some point. And so it's going to happen. And that's why I think your book is really helpful. And, for individuals who are kind of in this process, because maybe you start with some of the emotional baggage, like you don't have the money to get divorced just yet. You don't even know if you want, we're getting ready for the holidays. I don't want to ruin my kids' holidays, maybe in the new year, maybe in January, February, I don't know. But how do you start to get emotionally ready for the process? Because realistically, that will make the process cheaper because you will be more efficient with your emotions I mean, a lot of times I have attorneys and financial experts that have told people you need to get a therapist during this process, or you're going to spend a lot of money getting therapy from an attorney or an expert that's going to charge you $300 to $500 to $600 an hour.
The only thing I want to say is that when you get that therapist, and I'm a big believer in therapists, and I'm a big believer in divorce coaches. I coach coaches. Don't take legal advice from a divorce therapist, because don't take financial advice from a divorce therapist. Just like this is why I always like to bring a financial person into the divorce. Like, the divorce attorney doesn't have as much experience with complicated financials, right? The therapist sometimes gives advice that is not the most strategic advice for custody or for support. So you really need to do these things as a team. I love the whole team concept. I love working with, even both people have therapists, and then they can sign waivers, and we can talk about what's the best advice to move people forward. Because if you just listen to your therapist blindly, that therapist may come from a divorced family. They may have done some training in divorce, but unless you are in the courtroom, like I've done, I don't know, 2,000 divorces by now, and I lived through a divorce, and my husband's been divorced before. I mean, it's like a theme. I always said, if my parents hadn't divorced, I'm sure I would have done something really cool, but it's hard to say what, right? If you get a therapist, talk to them about your emotional well-being and stick to that. And your lawyer, depending on who you get for a lawyer, will be able to give you emotional advice or not. It really depends. And that's part of the selection process, right? It's going to be the attorney that I'm of counsel to in Manhattan. She is not going to sit there and hold your hand and say, oh, how's that going to impact your kid? That's just not what she's going to think about, which is fine. Right. And I'm not going to say, you need to get every last dollar. I'm not. And that's fine too. And I really appreciate my relationship with her, because we talk about that without judgment with each other. We're philosophically different. We both think I'm better.
But I think that you bring up an interesting point. Now, I would even say, don't try to get therapy from your friends who have gotten divorced, because everybody's going to have a different story. And it doesn't mean that they are legal experts because they did a divorce and they had in their minds, a favorable divorce. And don't take, but I think that's the best tip that you said, is get just a little bit of money and go see what your rights are. There's some attorneys that will do a free first consultation, but most will not. Most will, and quite frankly, you maybe want to pay just a little bit of money to get some really good advice, because then that sets the framework for how you're going to go down this path, or discuss it with your spouse and things like that. Let's see if we have any more thoughts. So, yeah.
Oh, I just want to talk about one thing.
Yeah.
What you just said. So you need to think about what your rights are, and then once you sort of settle and get grounded in what your rights are, you want to think about what's the best strategy for you and for your spouse, your soon-to-be ex-spouse, to create the healthiest environment for your kids. Because, even if your lawyer always wins, what they may do to win could create an unknowable amount of collateral damage for you and for your family. And so, maybe it won't, but you just need to think about that. And when dealing with your spouse, you need to sort of start making a container for resolving your concerns with each other, so that you're not calling the lawyer every time. That's the kind of coaching I do. I call it strategic legal consultation, which tends to be more high net worth clients who want to bounce things off of me before they run to their lawyer, because they talk to me. It's sort of one and done. I'm not filing things and calling lawyers, and in an hour they may save 10 hours of heartache, never mind the money.
Right, right. No, and I think that, the times now have really been a great facilitation of divorce discussions online, only because I think there are a lot of times where these people don't want to be together and they kind of want to talk it through, but it's harder, for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, people are adverse to conflict. They don't like conflict. And so sometimes being in the same room with somebody, you can't talk. But there's been a fascinating dynamic that when we're just here with cameras, there's nobody in my room. I would assume there's nobody in your room. But now we can we can say something that maybe we couldn't say before. So as a kind of a parting discussion, where do you see the future of divorce and online mediation, for next year, for the next couple years? Where do you see it going?
So I think online mediation as an option is here to stay. I think it's fabulous, especially in high conflict situations and high conflict, high net worth. Very, very useful, because you have to remember, you might say, oh, well, I need to be in person. If you are in person, you run the risk of that unpleasant conversation in the parking lot before the mediation, after the mediation. You have all that stress. Whereas in this kind of context, you can be in the comfort of your own home with a cup of tea, with your legs up and your pajama pants on. You can just be relaxed. You do not have to have uncomfortable moments. You can take breaks. You can, I put people in breakout rooms all the time. You can do all kinds of great things. I think that online mediation is definitely here to stay. I personally love it. When I did my book tour, I started to do online mediation because I had to, because I was traveling so much. And then the pandemic hit and I was already doing it, which was, useful. But I do think there's a set of people who are going to want to continue to have the brick and mortar presence, sort of old timers.
Sure.
And I think there are people who are still going to put some value on the in-person old way of doing things. But I really think it's a big time waste. I think it's much less efficient. I mean, my divorce is, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was doing these flat rate divorces for several $1,000s. And it was like, you had to do a meeting every week for 4 weeks, done. And it was unbelievable how quickly people settled their cases. So I may start to do something like that again. But I think that online is wonderful. You can share screens. Right? I mean, I don't know how you're liking it, Melissa. But
I think that before the pandemic, I wanted everybody to do online anyway.
Yeah.
But it would only be like, well, somebody is not available, or we had a change in schedule and we'll do it. For even my perspective, it's even helped litigation. Like, we do Zoom hearings. We do, things that you were sitting at the courthouse just waiting for hours, that you're charging your client. And then, like, you talk to the judge, or you do a hearing for like 30 minutes. I think that all of it's going to change. And I think that it kind of made us go a couple years forward. Like, I expected this to happen, but like, in the next 5 years, I was like, this is a long-term plan. And then it wasn't a long-term plan. It was like,
I think it was going to take even longer than 5 years. I think this forced people. In fact, there are some mediators locally who I was trying to push to do this, because I was like, I love it, because I meet people from all over the country. People hire me because they like me, right? And so it's typically a good fit. Like, you're drawn to people who you get along with. That's just the way it works. And this lawyer was so averse to it. I offered to train her. She's a little older. She's a wonderful person, a great mediator. And she just wouldn't do it. And now she does it. She still doesn't love it, but she can do it, So
I also think you get access to people that you wouldn't normally,
100%.
I mean, you can do mediations in any state. I can do mediations in any state, but I can do valuations in any state. And why would you just go and get somebody that's on your street or in your town when you could get some of the best? Exactly. This is hopefully one time that you do this, and I mean, sometimes not, but hopefully. And so do you want it done efficiently and fair, which nobody should use the word fair, but.
Okay. So now you just said two things that I really want to speak to quickly.
Okay.
So first of all, fair, no such thing. I can't tell you, last week I had like 6 people say, I just want to be fair. And I had to go into this whole diatribe about, there may be one set of facts, but there are many truths, many ways to look at that. There's no such thing. But the other thing is about mediation and recidivism. If you arrive at an agreement together and you don't glaze over the important points when you arrive at that agreement is so much more likely to remain sticky, meaning so much more likely to stand the test of time. Now, be careful that you don't hire and finish with a mediator who lets you do an agreement filled with agreements to agree, such as the parties believe that they can amicably resolve the holiday schedule, because the last thing you want is a fight on the night before Christmas.
Yeah.
Write it down, and you don't ever have to look at it again. You've got to fall back, but write it down. I mean, I learned this from working for the judge. So much litigation because of unclear agreements.
Yes. Or if you have younger children and you're like, oh, we'll just deal with college when it gets here. Right. Oh, we'll deal with private school. Like, we can figure that out. And I'm like, okay, but let's at least have a discussion. Right. Because if it is, like if you think you're on the same page, but you're not, let's see how far we are apart.
And by the way, you're never going to be closer when it comes to the children as when you're still like operating as one household. Because then when you recouple and there's other children and other spouses, it's like that much worse, and your kids could get shafted. And if it's in the agreement, actually that saves you, because let's say the agreement punts college until your kid's a junior in high school and your kid is a 6th grader now. Then you get married and you always thought you were going to save money. If the agreement doesn't say, each party to put X dollars away, your new spouse is not going to be happy about you voluntarily putting money away. But if you're contractually obligated to do that, then you're in a much better position. So these are the kind of things that a lot of mediators are not going to think about. They're not even going to be aware of it. So, you need to, if you have a mediator who you love, you may be the one who has to, unfortunately, bring up a lot of these topics. So I hope you're taking good notes. I'm sure Melissa's show is always filled with
yes, people are probably like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I do. Okay, so I've already said that one of the ways that people can get prepared for their mediation is to read your book. But are there any other things that kind of they could go through? And then we'll talk more about your book and how people can contact you.
So there are a lot of programs online that you can look into. There are some other good books out there for divorce as well. But the most important thing that you do is gather financial documents while you're still together. Don't worry about understanding everything. Just get as much as you can, make copies of stuff. If you're in an environment where you can talk about it, all the better. If you're not, then do what you need to do to get your hands on the stuff. Save the money for the subpoenas. Try to avoid that at all costs. And just clear your mind. Just know this is going to be a hard time. Just know you're going to feel like crap, and know that this is going to be over. And also get outside. Get outside, get your blood flowing, do breathing, create positive mantras. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the book. There's a lot. I've got a lot of tips. I also have an online video program that's not at all law. It's just all the mind clearing things. And, it's like about $100, and it's sort of like a companion to the book. Some people like that. It just, you can listen to the book. I think the hard copy of the book is really the way to go, because you can flag things. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a bit of a reference book. I purposefully wrote it so that you could open to any page at any time and find good, meaty information that you need in that moment.
I mean, because the way to be successful in like this alternative dispute resolution, so something other than court, is to be able to personally de-escalate your emotions.
Exactly.
If you're expecting to go in here and just blow up and get closure through that method, I think that that's hard because you give some mantras. This is the mantras to respect, because I really love the respect thing, because I think that's usually what's missing when we're in the divorce process, is this respect thing. But you said, nobody is all good or all bad. I commit to finding the highest intentions within my ex. And I think that that's important, because we go into this mistrust. We're like, they're trying to screw me over. They're trying to get over on me, when the reality, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to look at it just as they haven't given you the information yet. So let's get the information. Let's ask them questions about the information first, and then react or respond to that information. Because if you make the assumptions and you respond to the assumptions, that's where we're just going down a rabbit hole. And now you've spent an hour talking about, the time that they accidentally left you at the airport for 2 hours, because they were flirting with somebody at the bar. I don't know, right? We can delve through that. But the reality is, there are a lot of options for people to get divorced. And you have to do some research to find the right way for your family. And there is nobody that can tell you that right way, but you can talk to people like you, like me, and just say, what should I expect?
Right.
And
there's an article that I wrote on, I think it's on Thrive Global, and it's called "Beware the Stranger in Black Robes." And it's a nice little outline of what you're not going to get in court.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of meant to bring that up before for you.
Yeah, I love it. No, you have a lot of blogs. This is your main website. And then it's also the link to the Better Apart book. And so people can reach out to you. You do tons of speaking engagements. You do consulting. You do coaching for other, there are a fair amount of other mediators, valuation experts and financial experts that will be watching this podcast, and you are a resource to them to help them be a better mediator.
Absolutely. And a great way to start is to just sign up for the one and done. It's like $2.99, and it's an hour-and-a-half program. Or if you want to put together a little group, reach out to me. If you just go to GabrielleHartley.com, you'll see all of my services. And if you are a positive divorce professional who is listening, check out the Better Apart blog. You and I are going to have to talk about that. You're going to need to do something. Every week on Tuesday, I put out a blog written mostly by guests in the area of finance, wellness, and co-parenting. And it goes out to across all social, as well as to my extensive list. And it's a wonderful resource for people. And I love to hear from you if you would like to be part of that resource.
Of course. Of course.
You can work with me by clicking at the top of the page. It says, are you a divorce professional or are you getting divorced? And that will, get you there.
And that's your main website, right?
My main website is GabrielleHartley.com.
Okay,
so
perfect.
You go there, there's everything. Message me, the book, absolutely everything is right there.
And we're going to list all of your contact information. Reach out. I will have to say that you are very reachable, but you are also kind of famous. So it's nice because you've been all over people, and it's amazing. You have amazing connections. I think that you've done some things that people just dream of wanting to do, including being on TV and interviewed and, posted on major networks. This is really amazing, but you're also relatable and you're also touchable. And I think that people should reach out to you because your training programs are very reasonable. The pricing is great. And I think that you could provide, because we as mediators never stop learning. I don't care what we do. We have to constantly hone the psychology, the financial, the everything. And we have to, I thought this is kind of cheesy before, but we also have to maintain our own self-care, because this is an emotionally big process for even the mediator.
Right. You have vicarious post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. So yeah, we touch on that. So like I said, the Better Apart program, it's a nice, quick thing you can do. I also offer a longer thing, a longer program for total practice makeover. But the one and done is a really great way to kickstart. And then if you ever want to pick up the phone and talk to me, I like that you think I'm so accessible. Talk to my children. I don't think they think I'm accessible. No. But I feel very strongly about the positive divorce movement. It's sort of like it's what I am. It's what I'm working for. And, I want to help all of our children and our grandchildren and all of you. So I'm here to support you, professionals and people who, if you're getting divorced, if you want to reach out and learn how to work with me. I don't mean to be like an infomercial, but you're more than welcome to reach out to me at GabrielleHartley.com.
No, I appreciate it. I think most of the people that I have on here, I try to have people that are responsive and that they're willing to help others in the profession. That's what we try to do here, and help others that are going through this process, because it's not easy, but it doesn't also have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be painful and like traumatic. So, but it's still got a lot of work, and you got to be a part of it. No one's going to do it for you. So I appreciate your information, and I'm sure we'll do some more fun stuff this coming year. So
I'm very excited. And when we hang up, if you can send me your tags and everything.
Oh yeah, of course. All right. Well, thanks, Gabrielle.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.